What if I told you that Iran's nuclear threats, its hatred for Israel, and even its final destiny were written in the Bible thousands of years ago? Right now, as tensions escalate in the Middle East, ancient prophecies are unfolding before our eyes. The same nation that God once used to rebuild Jerusalem is now marching toward a prophetic collision that will shake the world. From Cyrus the Great to the kings of the East, from Esther's deliverance to Ezekiel's final war, Iran's story was predetermined by the Almighty himself. Today, we're witnessing the setup for the greatest prophetic fulfillment in human history. The truth about Iran's destiny isn't found in news headlines. It's written in the pages of Scripture, and what you're about to discover will leave you speechless. This is the biblical destiny of Iran, and the countdown has already begun. Picture this incredible moment in history. 150 years before a man named Cyrus was even born, God spoke his name through the prophet Isaiah. Think about that for a second. God knew this man's name, his mission, and his destiny before he ever took his first breath. This wasn't just divine knowledge, this was divine appointment. While Cyrus was still just a possibility in the future, God was already planning exactly how he would use this pagan king to accomplish his perfect will. In Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28, God made this stunning declaration, "That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid." But God wasn't finished. In the very next chapter, Isaiah 45:1, something absolutely mind-blowing happens. God calls this pagan Persian king his anointed, saying, "Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut." The word anointed here is the Hebrew word Mashiach, the same word we translate as Messiah. God was giving a foreign king who didn't even worship him the same sacred title used for Israel's greatest leaders like King David. This wasn't just any ordinary ruler. This was God's chosen instrument for a specific purpose. Cyrus would rise to become the most powerful man on earth, conquering nation after nation, building the largest empire the world had ever seen. Yet, he was simply fulfilling what God had written in his book generations before Cyrus ever existed. What makes this prophecy even more remarkable is that Isaiah lived during a time when Assyria was the dominant world power. Babylon hadn't even conquered Assyria yet, let alone been conquered by Persia. Yet God was looking centuries into the future, past empires that hadn't yet risen, to name the specific man who would accomplish his will. This demonstrates God's absolute sovereignty over the affairs of nations and his perfect knowledge of future events. The prophecy continued in Isaiah 45:2-3, "I will go before thee, and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness, and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel." God promised to personally go before Cyrus, opening doors that no man could shut, giving him victory after victory. Every conquest, every treasure, every triumph would serve one ultimate purpose, that Cyrus might know the God of Israel was the true God. The Jewish people had been living as captives in Babylon for decades. Their beautiful temple lay in ruins, their beloved city walls were broken down like scattered stones, and hope seemed like a distant memory. Children had grown up never seeing their homeland. Old men wept when they remembered Zion. The harps hung silent on the willow trees by the rivers of Babylon. It was a picture of complete desolation and despair. The captivity had lasted so long that many Jews had begun to wonder if God had forgotten his promises. Some had started families in Babylon, learned the language, adapted to the culture. The younger generation barely remembered the stories of Jerusalem's glory. It seemed like the exile might last forever. But God had made a promise through his prophet Jeremiah that would change everything. In Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10, he declared with absolute certainty, "For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you, and perform my good word toward you, in causing you to return to this place." Exactly 70 years after the first captives were taken to Babylon, Cyrus issued a decree that sent shockwaves throughout the Persian Empire. This wasn't some small administrative decision. This was history being rewritten by the hand of God. In the first chapter of Ezra, verses 2 and 3, we read Cyrus's own words, words that must have sounded like music to Jewish ears. "Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem." Notice something remarkable here. Cyrus acknowledges that the God of Israel is the God. This pagan king had somehow come to understand that his vast empire was given to him by the God of a captive people. The decree continued in verse 4, "And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver, and with gold, and with goods, and with beasts, beside the free will offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem." This wasn't just permission to go home. This was royal funding for the journey and the rebuilding project. Persian treasury would pay for Jewish restoration. The same empire that had inherited Jewish captives from Babylon was now setting them free and sending them home with gifts. God had turned their captivity into their liberation through the very king he had named 150 years earlier. The scale of this liberation was unprecedented in ancient history. Never before had a conquering empire voluntarily released captive peoples and funded their return to their homelands. Most conquerors scattered defeated populations to prevent rebellion and ensure control. But Cyrus was operating under divine direction, following a script written by the God of Israel long before he was born. The Persian Empire became the instrument of Jewish restoration, proving that God can use any nation, any ruler, any circumstance to accomplish his perfect will. Years passed, and a new Persian king named Xerxes sat on the throne. Many Jews had returned to Jerusalem, but thousands still lived throughout the Persian Empire. They had built new lives, established businesses, and found prosperity in foreign lands. These Jewish communities stretched from India to Ethiopia, scattered across 127 provinces of the vast Persian Empire. But danger was coming in a way none of them could have imagined. The threat would come from within the very government that had protected them. It would be personal, vindictive, and aimed at nothing less than the complete extinction of the Jewish race. A man named Haman had risen to power as the king's right-hand man. His hatred for the Jews burned like fire, especially toward a Jewish man named Mordecai, who refused to bow down to him. Haman's rage led him to plot something unspeakable, the complete destruction of every Jewish person in the empire. In Esther chapter 3, verse 13, we see the horrifying decree, "And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey." The date was set. The orders were sent to every corner of the empire, and death seemed certain. But unknown to Haman, God had already placed his secret weapon in the palace, a young Jewish woman named Esther, who had become queen. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he sent word to Esther, begging her to intervene. Esther's response revealed her fear. Approaching the king uninvited meant risking death. But Mordecai's reply in Esther chapter 4 verse 14 contains some of the most powerful words in all of Scripture. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther made her choice. She risked everything, approached the king, and invited him and Haman to a private banquet. At the second banquet, she revealed the truth. In Esther 7:3-4, she pleaded, Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. The king's rage against Haman was swift and terrible. Haman was executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The Jews were given permission to defend themselves, and they were saved. They established the festival of Purim to remember this incredible deliverance. Once again, Persia became the place where God preserved his chosen people through impossible circumstances. What seemed like the end of the Jewish people became instead a demonstration of God's faithfulness to his covenant. The very empire that could have been used to destroy them became their protection. The festival of Purim, still celebrated by Jews today, commemorates not just their physical survival, but God's supernatural intervention through unlikely circumstances. Esther's courage, Mordecai's wisdom, and even the king's insomnia all worked together in God's perfect timing to save his people. The Persian Empire once again served as God's instrument of preservation. While serving in the Persian government, the elderly prophet Daniel received visions that would reveal the future of empires and kingdoms. Daniel had survived the transition from Babylonian to Persian rule, and now God was showing him things that were yet to come. He was probably in his 80s by this time, a man who had seen kingdoms rise and fall, who had interpreted dreams for kings and survived lions' dens. These weren't just dreams or wishful thinking. These were direct revelations from the throne room of heaven about the destiny of nations. The first vision came through interpreting King Nebuchadnezzar's dream about a massive statue. In Daniel chapter 2 verses 32 and 39, Daniel explained, This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. The chest and arms of silver represented the kingdom that would follow Babylon, Persia. This empire would be inferior to Babylon in some ways, perhaps in the absolute power of its rulers, but it would be vast and enduring. Years later, in Daniel, chapter 7, Daniel saw the same kingdoms in a different form. In verse 5 he described, And behold another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. This bear represented Persia, raised up on one side because Persia became stronger than its partner Media. The 3 ribs in its mouth likely represented the 3 major kingdoms it would devour: Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. The command to devour much flesh showed Persia's destiny to conquer vast territories and many peoples. But the most detailed vision about Persia came in Daniel chapter 8. Beginning in verse 3, Daniel saw something remarkable. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Daniel watched as this ram charged west, north, and south, conquering everything in its path. Verse 4 says, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward. so that no beasts might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will, and became great. Later the angel Gabriel explained the vision in verse 20. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. Daniel was seeing the future of the very empire he served, its rise to greatness, and ultimately its defeat by Greece, represented in the vision by a swift goat. These visions weren't just historical curiosities. They were God's way of showing Daniel that he knew the end from the beginning. Every empire, every conquest, every rise and fall was part of his sovereign plan. Daniel could serve the Persian government with confidence, knowing that God was in complete control of world events. The same God who had delivered him from lions and furnaces was directing the course of nations according to his eternal purposes. Decades after the temple was rebuilt in Jerusalem, the holy city still had a problem that broke the hearts of faithful Jews everywhere. Jerusalem's walls lay in ruins, her gates were burned with fire, and the city remained defenseless and vulnerable. This wasn't just an architectural problem. It was a security crisis and a source of shame. A city without walls was a city without dignity, without protection, without proper identity in the ancient world. This news reached a Jewish man named Nehemiah, who served in the Persian court as cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. The irony was striking. Here was a Jew living in luxury in the Persian palace, while his ancestral city lay in disgrace. The position of cupbearer was one of the most trusted roles in the Persian government. Nehemiah literally held the king's life in his hands every day, tasting his wine to ensure it wasn't poisoned. When Nehemiah heard about Jerusalem's shameful condition, his heart was crushed. In Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, we read about his response. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. For months, Nehemiah prayed and mourned in secret, but one day his sadness showed on his face in the king's presence. In ancient Persia, appearing sad before the king could be seen as disrespectful or even treasonous. In Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 2, the king noticed, Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid. But Nehemiah took courage and explained his burden. In verse 3 he replied, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? What happened next was miraculous. Not only did the king give Nehemiah permission to go to Jerusalem, but he also provided everything needed for the journey and the rebuilding project. In Nehemiah 2:7-8, we see the incredible generosity. Moreover, I said unto the king, If it please thee, King, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over, till I come into Judah, and a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me, according to the good hand of my God upon me. This decree was far more significant than it might appear. According to Daniel's prophecy in chapter 9, verse 25, this command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem would start the countdown to the coming of Messiah. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. Persian authority and Persian resources made possible the rebuilding that would count down to the coming of Christ. Once again, God was using this mighty empire to fulfill his promises to his people. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem, something extraordinary happened that connected Persia to the greatest moment in human history. According to Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him." These weren't just any wise men. They were magi, most likely from Persia, the land where Daniel had served as a high official centuries before. These men had traveled hundreds of dangerous miles, following a supernatural star, carrying precious gifts, all because they knew that the King of the Jews had been born. Their journey would have taken months, across deserts and mountains, facing bandits and harsh weather, all to worship a baby they had never seen. Think about the dedication this required, leaving their comfortable lives, their positions of influence, their wealth and safety, all to follow a star to an unknown destination. How did Persian wise men know about Jewish prophecies? The answer goes back to Daniel and the Jewish community that had remained in Persia after the exile. Daniel had served in high positions under both Babylonian and Persian rulers. He had access to the royal libraries and the wisdom schools of the empire. The knowledge of Jewish messianic expectations had been preserved and passed down through generations of Persian magi. These wise men weren't just curious scholars, they were worshippers who had come to honor the newborn king. Matthew 2:11 gives us this beautiful scene. "And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Each gift carried deep meaning. Gold recognized Jesus as king. Frankincense acknowledged his deity as it was used in temple worship. Myrrh, used for burial, prophetically pointed to his sacrificial death. Persian wisdom and Persian wealth were laid at the feet of the Christ child. But God used these foreign visitors for another crucial purpose. In Matthew 2:12 we read, "And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way." Their visit alerted King Herod to the birth of a rival king, leading to the Holy Family's escape to Egypt. Even this fulfilled prophecy, as Matthew 2:15 notes, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, "Out of Egypt have I called my son." The story of Persia in God's plan reaches back to the very beginning of human history, to the time right after the Great Flood when Noah's family began to repopulate the earth. In Genesis chapter 10, verse 22, we find the genealogical record. The children of Shem, Elam, and Ashur, and Arphaxad, and Lud, and Aram. Elam was one of the sons of Shem, and his descendants became the foundation of what we know as the Persian people. They settled in the land that would later become the heart of the mighty Persian Empire. This wasn't random or accidental, it was part of God's divine plan for organizing the nations of the earth. Every family line had a purpose, every migration had meaning, every settlement was part of a greater design. The ancient world understood genealogies differently than we do today. These weren't just family trees, they were prophetic roadmaps showing how God would work through different peoples and nations throughout history. Genesis 10:32 makes this clear. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. Every tribe, every people group, every nation had its place in God's design. The Elamites, who would eventually become the Persians, were part of this original blueprint for human civilization. The prophet Jeremiah later spoke about Elam's significance in God's plans. In Jeremiah 25:25, Elam is listed among the nations that would participate in God's judgment, and all the kings of Zimri, and all the kings of Elam, and all the kings of the Medes. Even in judgment, Elam had a role to play in God's unfolding purposes. This ancient connection shows us something profound. God's plan for using Persia wasn't a last-minute decision. From the very beginning, when he divided the nations after the flood, he knew exactly how the descendants of Elam would fit into his grand story of redemption. The same God who scattered the nations at Babel would one day use the Persian Empire to gather his people back to Jerusalem. The Table of Nations in Genesis 10 is like a prophetic roadmap, showing us that every people group has a purpose in God's plan. The Persians weren't just another empire that happened to rise and fall. They were descendants of Elam, with a destiny written in the stars before their empire ever existed. When God decided to judge the mighty Babylon for its cruelty and pride, he raised up Persia as his instrument of justice. This wasn't just politics or military strategy. This was divine judgment executed through human armies. In Isaiah chapter 13, verse 17, God declared his intention clearly. "Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it." The Medes had joined forces with the Persians to create an unstoppable empire. Unlike other conquerors who fought primarily for wealth, these warriors would be motivated by something deeper. They would execute God's judgment regardless of Babylon's riches. This was warfare with a divine purpose, conquest with a heavenly mandate. Babylon had seemed invincible, with its massive walls, its hanging gardens, its vast wealth, and its powerful armies. But no earthly power can stand against the judgments of the Almighty when the time for justice arrives. Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 11, shows God's direct involvement in raising up this Persian-Median alliance. "Make bright the arrows, and gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his devices against Babylon, to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple." This was personal for God. Babylon had destroyed his temple, carried away his people, and mocked his name. Now the time for vengeance had come, and Persia would be his hammer of justice. The prophecy continued in Jeremiah 51:28. "Prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion." God was mobilizing not just an army, but entire nations under Persian leadership to bring down the empire that had seemed invincible. When Babylon finally fell to Cyrus and his armies, it fulfilled prophecies that had been written decades earlier. The same empire that had destroyed Jerusalem and enslaved God's people was now being destroyed by the very nation God had chosen to restore his people. It was perfect justice. Babylon would fall, and Persia would rise to become the key to Israel's restoration. But Persia's role as God's tool didn't end with Babylon's destruction. The empire would go on to fund the rebuilding of Jerusalem, protect the returning exiles, and provide the governmental structure that allowed God's people to re-establish themselves as a nation. Through Persian kings like Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, God demonstrated a principle that would echo throughout history. He raises up nations and brings them down according to his sovereign will and perfect timing. The rise and roll of Persia proves that no empire, no matter how powerful, operates outside of God's control. Every kingdom serves his purposes, whether they know it or not. Persia became great because God made them great, and they accomplished his will because he guided their steps. From the naming of Cyrus 150 years before his birth to the financing of Jerusalem's walls, every Persian action was part of God's master plan for his people and his glory. More than 2,500 years ago, the prophet Jeremiah received a vision that would speak directly to our modern world. In Jeremiah chapter 49, starting at verse 34, God gave him a prophecy specifically about Elam, the ancient name for what we now call Iran. This prophecy came during the first year of King Zedekiah's reign, and it contained both judgment and hope for the distant future. The timing of this prophecy is significant because it came just before the final destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon, linking Iran's destiny to Israel's own journey through judgment and restoration. Jeremiah 49:35-36 declares, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might, and upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds. And there shall be no nation whither the outcasts of Elam shall not come." The bow of Elam represented their military strength, their ability to defend themselves and project power. In ancient times, Elam was famous for its skilled archers and military prowess, but God was promising to break this strength and scatter the Elamite people to the four winds. They would be dispersed among all nations, with no corner of the earth untouched by their presence. This scattering has a chilling relevance to today's world. Iran's current nuclear program has created global tension, with nations worried about weapons that could be launched from Iranian soil. The technology and knowledge of nuclear weapons could indeed scatter Iranian influence to the four winds if conflict were to arise. The bow of Elam might represent not just conventional military might, but the modern weapons that Iran seeks to develop. Verse 37 continues the sobering prophecy, "For I will cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies, and before them that seek their life. And I will bring evil upon them, even my fierce anger, saith the Lord, and I will send the sword after them, till I have consumed them." Iran today faces enemies on multiple fronts: tensions with Israel, sanctions from Western nations, and internal pressure from its own people. The country that once was used by God to liberate his people now finds itself isolated and under pressure from the international community. The Islamic Republic's aggressive foreign policy has alienated former allies and created a web of conflicts that stretch across the Middle East. Yet this isn't the end of the story. The prophecy takes a remarkable turn in verses 38-39. "And I will set my throne in Elam, and will destroy from thence the king and the princes, saith the Lord. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord." God promises that he will set his throne in Elam. He will establish his authority there. The current rulers will be removed, but then comes the hope. In the latter days, the captives of Elam will return. This suggests that after a time of judgment and scattering, Iran will experience restoration. The same nation that faces judgment will also receive mercy in God's perfect timing. The prophet Ezekiel received one of the most detailed prophecies about end-times warfare, and Iran plays a central role in this coming conflict. In Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 5, God specifically names Persia among the nations that will join a massive coalition against Israel. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. This isn't just any battle. This is the war of Gog and Magog, led by a ruler called Gog from the land of Magog. Most Bible scholars identify this leader as coming from the north, likely from modern-day Russia. Ezekiel 38:15 describes this northern invasion. "And thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company and a mighty army." Iran's inclusion in this coalition is particularly significant because it represents a complete reversal from ancient times. Where Persia once protected and restored Israel, modern Iran has become one of Israel's most vocal enemies. The Islamic Republic regularly calls for Israel's destruction and funds terrorist organizations dedicated to attacking Israeli civilians. Today's headlines confirm this prophetic alignment. Iran has formed strong military partnerships with Russia, sharing weapons technology and coordinating military actions in Syria and other regions. Iranian leaders have repeatedly threatened to wipe Israel off the map, and they fund proxy armies like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Ezekiel 38:16 shows God's purpose in allowing this invasion. And thou shalt come up against my people of Israel as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days, and I will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me, when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. God will allow this coalition to form and attack Israel, but not for Israel's destruction. Instead, it will become the stage for God to demonstrate his power and holiness to the watching world. The attack will backfire spectacularly, becoming a trap for Iran and its allies. The destruction of this coalition is described in Ezekiel 39:3-4. And I will smite thy bow out of thy left hand, and will cause thine arrows to fall out of thy right hand. Thou shalt fall upon the mountains of Israel, thou, and all thy bands, and the people that is with thee. I will give thee unto the ravenous birds of every sort, and to the beasts of the field to be devoured. Iran's modern military alliance with Russia and its commitment to Israel's destruction seem to be setting the stage for this prophetic fulfillment. The nation that once sent wise men to worship the newborn King of the Jews will march with armies to destroy his people, only to face divine judgment instead. The book of Revelation speaks of a massive army that will march from the east during the final days of human history. In Revelation chapter 16, verse 12, John saw this incredible vision. And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. The Euphrates River has always been a natural barrier between the east and the west. For an eastern army to cross into the Middle East and march toward Israel, this river would need to become passable. God will supernaturally dry up this ancient waterway to make room for the largest military force in human history. Revelation 9:16 gives us the staggering number of this eastern army. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. That's 200 million soldiers, a number that would have been impossible in John's day, but is conceivable today with modern populations. Iran sits perfectly positioned to be part of this Eastern coalition. The country lies east of the Euphrates River, has a large population, and maintains military partnerships with other Eastern powers like China and Russia. Iran's current hostility toward Israel and its alliance with nations that oppose Western influence make it a natural participant in this end-times invasion. The destination of this massive army is clear from Revelation 16:16. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. This eastern force will converge with other armies at the valley of Megiddo in northern Israel for the final battle of human history. Iran's strategic location between the ancient Euphrates and modern Israel places it in the direct path of this prophetic march. The nation's current military cooperation with Eastern powers like China and Russia could easily develop into the kind of alliance that would participate in such a massive invasion. But this army will not achieve its goal of destroying Israel. Revelation 19:19-21 describes their fate. And I saw the beast, and the kings of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat upon the horse, and against his army. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone, and the remnant was slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse. Iran's participation in this Eastern army will bring the nation face to face with the returning King of Kings. The same Jesus whom Persian wise men once worshipped as a baby will return as a conquering king to judge those who sought to destroy his people. The transformation of Iran from Israel's ancient protector to its modern enemy represents one of the most dramatic reversals in biblical prophecy. Today's headlines read like pages torn from Ezekiel's visions, with Iran openly calling for Israel's destruction while building the military capability to carry out such threats. Iran's nuclear program has become the centerpiece of this modern conflict. The Islamic Republic has enriched uranium far beyond what's needed for peaceful purposes, defying international sanctions and inspections. Israeli leaders have repeatedly warned that they will not allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons, setting up a potential military confrontation that could reshape the Middle East. The proxy war between Iran and Israel plays out across multiple fronts. Iran funds and arms Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has amassed over 100,000 rockets pointed at Israeli cities. In Gaza, Iran provides weapons and training to Hamas and other terrorist groups that regularly attack Israeli civilians. Syria has become a battlefield where Iranian forces and Israeli military forces clash regularly. Iranian leaders make no secret of their intentions. They regularly participate in rallies where crowds chant "Death to Israel" and "Death to America." The Islamic Republic has made the destruction of Israel a central pillar of its foreign policy, spending billions of dollars annually to fund terrorist organizations and build weapons systems aimed at the Jewish state. This modern hostility fulfills ancient prophecies about the nations gathering against Israel in the last days. Psalm 83:4 describes this exact scenario. They have said, "Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance." Iran's stated goal of wiping Israel off the map matches this ancient prediction perfectly, yet Israel's survival and prosperity despite these threats also fulfill prophecy. Jeremiah 31:35-36 promises, "Thus saith the Lord, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and of the stars for a light by night. If those ordinances depart from before me, saith the Lord, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. As long as the sun rises and the moon shines, Israel will remain a nation." Iran's threats, no matter how severe, cannot override God's covenant promises to his people. The current tensions are setting the stage for the final confrontation described in biblical prophecy, where God will defend Israel and judge the nations that seek her destruction. The Abraham Accords, which have brought peace between Israel and several Arab nations, have only intensified Iran's isolation and anger. As more Middle Eastern countries recognize Israel's right to exist, Iran finds itself increasingly alone in its commitment to Israel's destruction. This isolation may drive Iran to more desperate measures, potentially fulfilling the prophetic scenarios described in Ezekiel and Revelation. Even in the midst of prophecies about judgment and war, the Bible contains remarkable promises about Iran's spiritual future. The prophet Isaiah received visions that look beyond the coming conflicts to a time when the nations, including Persia, will turn to worship the God of Israel. Isaiah chapter 2 verses 2-3 paints this beautiful picture. "And it shall come to pass in the last days, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills. And all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths." This prophecy speaks of a time when all nations, not just Israel, will stream to Jerusalem to worship the true God. Iran, despite its current hostility, is included in this all nations that will one day acknowledge the God of Israel as the only true God. Isaiah 63 reinforces this promise. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. The light of God's glory will attract people from every nation, including the rulers of Persia, to come and worship in Jerusalem. Remarkably, this spiritual transformation may already be beginning. Despite severe persecution from the Islamic government, underground churches in Iran are experiencing explosive growth. Millions of Iranians are secretly converting to Christianity, creating what many missionary experts call the fastest growing church in the world. Iranian Christians risk imprisonment, torture, and death for their faith, yet they continue to multiply. House churches meet in secret, believers share their faith despite the danger, and Christian satellite television broadcasts reach millions of Iranian homes. The very nation whose government calls for Israel's destruction is simultaneously experiencing a spiritual awakening toward Israel's Messiah. This underground revival fulfills another prophecy from Isaiah 42:16. And I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and not forsake them. God is leading Iranian people out of the spiritual darkness of Islam into the light of the gospel. Many Iranian Christians report having dreams and visions of Jesus before they ever heard the gospel from human missionaries. God is supernaturally reaching into this closed nation to call out a people for his name. The spiritual hunger among Iranians has become so intense that many are willing to risk everything to follow Christ. The conversion of Iranians to Christianity also represents a fulfillment of the promise to Abraham in Genesis 12:3. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Through faith in Jesus, Iranian families are receiving the blessing promised to Abraham's seed. Even as their government curses Israel, individual Iranians are finding blessing through Israel's Messiah. God is leading Iranian people out of the spiritual darkness of Islam into the light of the gospel. Many Iranian Christians report having dreams and visions of Jesus before they ever heard the gospel from human missionaries. God is supernaturally reaching into this closed nation to call out a people for his name. The conversion of Iranians to Christianity also represents a fulfillment of the promise to Abraham in Genesis 12:3, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Through faith in Jesus, Iranian families are receiving the blessing promised to Abraham's seed. Iran's location on the world map gives it incredible strategic importance for end times events. The country sits at the crossroads of Asia, Europe, and Africa, controlling key waterways and land routes that will be crucial during the final conflicts of human history. This positioning isn't accidental. God has placed Iran exactly where it needs to be to fulfill its role in biblical prophecy. The Strait of Hormuz, controlled by Iran, is one of the world's most important shipping lanes. Nearly 40% of all seaborne oil passes through this narrow waterway, making it a choke point for global energy supplies. Iran regularly threatens to close this strait during international tensions, demonstrating how one nation can hold the world economy hostage. This control gives Iran leverage far beyond what its military might alone would suggest. This control over oil shipping fits perfectly with biblical prophecies about economic chaos in the end times. Revelation 6:6 speaks of extreme inflation during the tribulation, and I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." Oil becomes a precious commodity that must be protected during these difficult times. Iran's position also makes it a natural bridge between the Eastern armies described in Revelation and the Middle Eastern battlefields where end times conflicts will occur. Any massive force moving from China, India, or other Eastern nations toward Israel would likely pass through or coordinate with Iran. The ancient Persian Empire stretched from India to Ethiopia, giving Iran historical claims and cultural connections across this vast region. Modern Iran maintains relationships with Shia populations in Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and other countries, creating a network of influence that could be crucial during end times events. Iran's development of missile technology allows it to project power across the entire Middle East. Iranian missiles can reach Israel, Saudi Arabia, and American military bases throughout the region. This capability makes Iran a key player in any regional conflict and positions it to fulfill its role in biblical prophecies about end times warfare. The country's oil reserves, estimated to be among the world's largest, give Iran economic leverage that extends far beyond its military capabilities. Nations dependent on Iranian oil find themselves constrained in how aggressively they can oppose Iranian policies, creating the kind of complex international relationships that characterize the end times political landscape. Iran's geographic position between the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf also gives it control over important trade routes connecting Europe with Asia. As global commerce becomes increasingly important in the end times, Iran's ability to disrupt these trade flows gives it influence far beyond what its military might alone would suggest. The story of Iran in biblical prophecy doesn't end with judgment and warfare. Some of the most hopeful promises in Scripture speak about the restoration that awaits this ancient land after the tribulation period ends. God's pattern throughout history has been judgment followed by mercy, and Iran will experience this divine cycle in its fullness. The same God who scattered will also gather. The same God who judged will also restore. Jeremiah's prophecy about Elam concludes with a stunning promise in Jeremiah 49:39. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord. The same God who promised judgment also promises restoration. Iran's scattered people will be regathered, and the nation will experience God's blessing once again. This promise stands as one of the most hopeful prophecies about Iran's future in all of Scripture. This promise of restoration fits the pattern established throughout biblical prophecy. Israel itself experienced centuries of exile before being regathered as a nation in 1948. The same God who restored Israel after nearly 2,000 years of dispersion will also restore Iran after its time of judgment. The Hebrew word translated, bring again the captivity, literally means to reverse the fortunes or restore the prosperity. This suggests that Iran will not merely survive the end times, but will actually prosper under God's blessing during the millennial kingdom. The nation that was scattered and judged will be gathered and blessed. Joel 2:25 establishes this principle of divine restoration. And I will restore to you the years that the locust hath eaten, the cankerworm, and the caterpillar, and the palmer worm, my great army which I sent among you. God promises to restore what was lost during the years of judgment, making up for the devastation with abundant blessing. Iran's restoration will likely include both physical and spiritual elements. The Persian people will return to their homeland. The land will be rebuilt and prosper. And most importantly, the people will acknowledge the God of Israel as their Lord and King. This restoration also suggests that Iran will play a positive role in the millennial kingdom. Rather than being excluded from God's future plans, the nation will be transformed from an enemy into a worshipper, from a source of conflict into a center of blessing. The timing of this restoration, in the latter days, connects it directly to the establishment of Christ's millennial kingdom. When Jesus returns to reign from Jerusalem, Iran will be among the nations that experience the full blessing of his righteous rule. When Jesus Christ returns to establish his 1,000-year reign on earth, Iran will have a place among the nations that serve the King of Kings. The Bible makes it clear that not all nations will be destroyed during the tribulation period. Some will survive and participate in the millennial kingdom under Christ's rule. Iran, despite its current rebellion, will be transformed into a worshipping nation under the righteous rule of the Prince of Peace. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 16 describes this incredible scene. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Even nations that fought against Israel will have survivors who will worship Christ in Jerusalem. The transformation will be complete and miraculous. This means that despite Iran's participation in end-times warfare against Israel, a remnant of Persian people will survive the judgments and be transformed into worshippers. The same hearts that once harbored hatred for Israel will be changed to love and serve the Jewish Messiah. Isaiah chapter 66 verses 18-19 provides more details about this gathering of nations. For I know their works and their thoughts. It shall come to pass that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory. And I will set a sign among them, and I will send those that escape of them unto the nations, and they shall declare my glory among the Gentiles. Iran will be among these nations that see God's glory and declare it to others. Persian people will become missionaries, spreading the knowledge of the true God to other nations during the millennial kingdom. The nation that once opposed God's people will become evangelists for God's glory. The transformation will be complete and supernatural. Ezekiel 36:26 describes the heart change that makes this possible. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you, and I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you an heart of flesh. Iranian people who survive the tribulation will receive new hearts that love what God loves and hate what God hates. Their natural hostility toward Israel will be replaced with supernatural love for God's chosen people. This Persian remnant will participate in the annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem, described in Zechariah 14:16-19. Every year during the Feast of Tabernacles, representatives from Iran will travel to Jerusalem to worship King Jesus and celebrate his goodness. The city that Iran once threatened to destroy will become their destination for worship and blessing. The wealth and resources of Iran will also be dedicated to God's service during the Millennium. Isaiah 60:11 promises, "Therefore thy gates shall be open continually, they shall not be shut day nor night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, and that their kings may be brought." Persian oil, Iranian technology, and the wealth of the ancient land will flow into Jerusalem to support Christ's kingdom. The nation's strategic location will serve God's purposes rather than Satan's schemes. Iran's influence will be used to spread righteousness instead of rebellion. The complete transformation of Iran from enemy to worshipper demonstrates the power of Christ's reign and the fulfillment of God's promise to bless all nations through Abraham's seed. What seems impossible today, Iran loving and serving Israel, will become reality when the Prince of Peace rules the earth from David's throne. The Persian Empire that once protected God's people will be restored to serve them again, but this time under the perfect rule of their Messiah King. If this video opened your eyes to God's incredible sovereignty over world events, don't keep this truth to yourself. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss these prophetic revelations. Share this video with everyone you know. Your family, friends, and social media followers need to see how current events align perfectly with biblical prophecy. The world is watching Iran with fear and confusion, but you now understand God's ultimate plan. Help others discover the hope and certainty that comes from knowing our God controls every detail of history. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more biblical revelations that will blow your mind and strengthen your faith. The countdown to Christ's return has begun, and Iran's destiny is just the beginning.